praise you and thank you for this opportunity to come before you to study your word, to show ourselves approved. Lord, we thank you for this gathering. We thank you for the unity in this place, that there's one heart, one spirit, and one voice, Father God, lifted up to you. We thank you, Lord, for opening the eyes of our heart to know you more through your word. And we dedicate this time to you in Jesus' name, amen. So you know the ministry is Igniting a Nation. You can find us on the web at ignitinganation.com, brand new website. Thank you, Will Ray, for doing that for us. And lots of exciting things up there. All of the daily blogs are posted up there. The calendar is up there. And you'll see that we're adding new things beginning in January. We'll be in Tuscaloosa beginning January the 11th. I'm here every Sunday morning with Pastor Tom as we're teaching a class called Thrive. And it's really basically how to thrive in a knowledge of the Lord. We'll be kicking off another class together on December 21st, so if you want to join us here at 9:30 in the fireside room on Sunday morning, the 21st, that'll be that's 2 weeks. But also if you want to come to the December 14th, they're having the choir performance, and so it'll be an exciting time for the holidays right here on Sunday morning. But we'll be in Tuscaloosa at the Church of Tuscaloosa starting January 5th. Every Tuesday we're up in Coleman at Berkeley Bob's, and every Thursday we're here. DVDs of the teachings are available. There's a gift pack of the 4 teachings, a 4 DVD set, and they are DVDs, so if you've been trying to play them in your car, they don't play in your car because they're videos. So unless you have a video player in your car, they won't play. But that set's available there for $20, and then the teaching on the Antichrist and the Mark of the Beast, and also Daniel 2 and Daniel 12 are there as well. And if you need just the individual DVDs, you already have 1 and 2, and you need 3 and 4, those are also there loose for you as well. Don't forget, we still have room on the Israel trip, which is June the 18th to 28th. And if you'd like information about that, let me know. Also, just a reminder that this is the last month of the year, so your contributions are tax deductible, and if you support our vision, we ask you to support it with your provision so that we can continue to minister the Word of God. You know this is about world events and Bible prophecy, and specifically end-time prophecy, and tonight we're going to talk about a couple of things as we lead into a 3-part series that's going to take us right to the Battle of Armageddon, right to the prophecies of Joel, Ezekiel, Zechariah. It's a compendium of end-time prophetic words from almost every one of the prophets of the Old Testament. So when you take a look at what was prophesied, there's events that have to happen, there's conditions that have to be met in order for these wars to take place. So the 2 impending wars are the Psalm 83 war and the Ezekiel 38-39 war of Armageddon. Har Megiddo, mountains of Megiddo. So that is the Battle of Armageddon. And the question really is tonight, is Psalm 83 a war in the Middle East? Is it past or is it future? Some would say that the battle is described in 2 Chronicles was the fulfillment of this. But the truth of the matter is the conditions of the Psalm 83 war, this 10-nation confederacy, this 10-people group confederacy that has to be formed, is forming today. And Israel is going to be responding to it in, I would say, within the next year or 2. There will be a very physical response from Israel. But in order to really understand this, we have to go down a path of understanding that there is a theology out there in the world, in the church world, in a lot of denominational Christianity, that's called replacement theology. Now, replacement theology is the belief that the church has replaced Israel, the Israel of the Bible, because of the rejection of Jesus, that the Jewish people are no longer the chosen people, that the church has taken on that role. And there's a list of denominations that really address this: has the church replaced Israel? And these denominations think it has. You've got the Roman Catholic Church, at the higher levels, the United Methodist Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. And these are just the statistics in America of the numbers. So you have over 100 million Americans in church affiliated with these denominations that in some way, shape, or form believe that their denomination or their church or the church has replaced Israel. So the real understanding of this is that replacement theology is also known as supersessionism, essentially teaches that the church has replaced Israel in God's plan. Adherents of replacement theology believe the Jews are no longer God's chosen people, and God does not have specific future plans for the nation of Israel. All the different views of the relationship between the church and Israel can be divided into two camps. Either the church is a continuation of Israel, replacement or covenant theology, or the church is completely different and distinct from Israel. And that's the foundation of some of this. So the Roman Catholic Church believes that they're now walking in the blessings of Israel. Now Romans 11 tells us that we're grafted in. I'm a natural branch grafted in. I was cut off for unbelief. So I lay on the ground just the same way you as a wild branch are grafted in with your faith in Jesus. What are we grafted into? We're grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. That's the spiritual representation of Israel. So are we the new Israel? Spiritually, we're grafted into the commonwealth of Israel. We're grafted into the commonwealth. The wealth of Israel is derived from Genesis 15 promises to Abraham. And if you remember, those Genesis 15 promises were specifically a land mass. And there were boundaries and borders of that land mass. They happen to be 12 times the size of Israel right now. So you have physical Israel, which is the nation of Israel, the land mass of Israel, and you have spiritual Israel. So are we co-inheritors? We are. The Bible tells us that we are co-inheritors, that we are inheritors of the promises and the inheritance to Abraham. That was land promised to Israel. Land promised to Israel some 4,000 years ago, and that has not changed. Now, the premise of this is if God can change his covenant with Israel, why can't he change his covenant with you? I mean, if John 3:16 is the final covenant of the Bible, for God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, that whomsoever would believe in him will not perish but would have eternal life, that was a covenant relationship. If you believe in Jesus, then in a covenant with God, he would give you certain things in exchange for that, a promise. But if he can go back and change any one of the 6 prior covenants, why couldn't he change that one? Well, God is not a man that he could change his mind, right? That's what Scripture tells us. God does not lie. The true nature of God is to bless, not curse. The true nature of God, as Moses appealed to the true nature of God when he lay prostrate in front of him for 40 days and 40 nights interceding on behalf of Israel, was not to have God change his mind, but for God to be reminded of his true nature, which was benevolent, which was loving, which was grace-filled, which was merciful. And it says God is slow to anger. Right? Was that sound we're looking for, Tom? Okay, that's a different sound. So if Israel is now the church, then all the prophecies leading to Jesus' return are nullified. Think about that. Matthew 23:37. In the Gospel of Matthew, he records this event where Jesus is standing on the Mount of Olives looking over the eastern gate of Jerusalem and proclaiming that Jerusalem is now a desolate house. Rome has overtaken them. The day is going to come when the temple is going to be destroyed. And that the ones who rejected him would not see the kingdom of heaven. And he said that until Jerusalem cries out, "Blessed is he come in the name of the Lord," they won't see him again. Well, then how could that be the church? It can't be. And if Israel is still the Israel of prophecy, we need to be aware of what's going on in Israel and the Middle East, because Jerusalem is the spiritual capital of the world. You know, a long time ago, it was believed that Jerusalem was the capital of the world. It's not that long ago that it was believed in biblical times that Jerusalem was the capital of the world. In the Bible, Jerusalem is the capital of the world. So if you're going to look for activities, and we have our eyes glued on the White House and what the White House is saying about the situation in New York, what the White House is saying about the situation in Ferguson, Missouri, we should be concerned about what the White House is saying about Israel. And in this election coming up in 2016, if we don't put a man in the White House to restore the blessings of America from Genesis 12:3, then America is going to continue its downward slide. And so the moral decay of America depends on what their position is on Israel, whether or not we walk in the blessings of Genesis 12:3. Now, Asaph wrote Psalm 83. Asaph had 2 very distinct roles in the Bible. Asaph was the chief minister of praise and worship for King David. And so we know that King David was a man who believed in jubilation, he believed in praise, he believed in celebration before the Lord, he danced before the Lord, he was a man who played instruments himself, and Asaph was his chief minister of music, a very important role in biblical Israel. But he was also called Chozer, C-H-O-Z-E-R, Chozer. Chozer is the word for seer, S-E-E-R. He was a seer, meaning God gave him visions of things that were prophetically going to happen. He did not see for the day, he saw for the future. And the Hebrew word chozer is different than the word navaim. Navaim is messenger of God, and that is a prophet. So a seer is not necessarily a prophet. Daniel was a seer, a chozer, but he wasn't a navaim. He wasn't a messenger of God. He didn't quote the Lord. He didn't say, "Thus says the Lord." Or he didn't start out by saying, an oracle of the Lord for Damascus, an oracle of the Lord for this city. He interpreted dreams, he was given dreams, and he was given visions. He was a chozer, not a navaim, not a messenger of God. So when we take a look at Psalm 83 sets something up in Israel. It's very significant. Because in order for Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is Gog Magog, Russia and Iran, this unholy alliance that China then plays a part in with their 200 million man army, when we look at eschatology, end-time prophetic work, we have to look at a series of events leading up to an inevitable occurrence. So about 7 or 8 years ago, and Tom and I were just talking about this, about 7 or 8 years ago, people really began to study the Ezekiel 38, 39 prophecy and realized that that was a biblical prophecy about Armageddon. And then they began to compare the Zechariah 12 and the Zechariah 14, 11, 12, and 14, and that became the battles that were leading up to Armageddon and Jesus' return. And then they began to look and said, well, there's conditions that have to be met in order for Ezekiel 38 and 39 to happen. And those conditions don't exist today. So what has to happen to cause this to take place? Now, you're familiar with what I'm talking about, Ezekiel 38 and 39, Gog, Magog, Prince of Meshach and Tubal. Are you familiar with that? Because if you're not familiar with that, we're going to talk about it a little bit later, and I'm going to connect the dots for you kind of visibly. So if I've kind of lost you a little bit, it's okay, because I'm going to pull you back into it pretty quickly. So I'm quoting chapters and verses, but we're actually going to read. Tonight is going to be a night where we're going to dive deeply into Psalm 83 and read it. And we're going to read it, and we're going to examine parts of it, and then we're going to look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, and we're going to read it, and we're going to examine parts of it. And this is going to be a 3-week series, because what we're going to do is once we establish the foundation of Psalm 83, the war of Psalm 83, which is a 10-nation confederacy, which is wiped off the face of the earth. And we'll look at who those people groups are and where they live today. And these are the descendants of Lot and the descendants of Esau, okay, and where they settled. And so they're named in the Bible. These people groups are named in the Bible, and we have to understand where they live today in order to understand what's going on in the environment. So let me take you to Psalm 83. This is Asaph. And what Asaph is doing, it's like a lament. It's like a prayer before God, because God has shown him this coming battle. He's shown him what's going to happen. He's given him a vision. As a chozer, he's got this vision of this battle that's going to take place, and he's calling out to God, and he's saying, God, intercede on behalf of Israel. Well, I know it's your will, but please, Lord, it's like a lament before the Lord. So it's a petition. And he said, God, do not keep silent. Be not quiet, O God, be not still. See how your enemies are astir, how your foes rear their heads. With cunning they conspire against your people. They plot against those you cherish. Come, they say, let us destroy them as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. Now you remember that this was 3,000 years ago that Asaph lived. The same blotting out of the name of Israel was the very thing that Pharaoh wanted to do to destroy Israel. The very thing that Haman wanted to do to destroy Israel, blot out their name. And in Judaism, we write the name of Haman on the bottom, on the soles of our shoes, and walk on it until the name is removed by walking on it and blot it out. That's kind of a traditional thing that you do. So if you look that Herod had the same view, he was going to blot out Israel, the name of Israel, from the history books. But God always reserved a remnant. You remember that Adolf Hitler had the same thing, to annihilate the Jews. Now you hear Ahmadinejad annihilate the Jews. Ayatollah Khomeini annihilate the Jews. You see these people in these Muslim temples annihilate the Jews. Okay, this is a common thing. Annihilate means to blot out, to remove entirely. So when you hear the word annihilate, now biblically the word is blot out. So when you hear this, that they let us destroy them as a nation, let the name of Israel be remembered no more, be blotted out. With one mind they plot together, they form an alliance against you. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites, of Moab and the Hagrites, Gebal, Ammon, and Amalek, Philistia with the people of Tyre, even Assyria has joined them to lend strength to the descendants of Lot. Selah. Do to them as you did to Midian, as you did to Sisera and Jabin at the river Kishon, who perished at Endor and became like refuge on the ground. Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, all their princes like Zebah and Zalmunna, who said, let us take possession of the pasture lands of God. Make them like tumbleweed, O my God, like chaff before the wind. As fire consumes the forest or a flame sets the mountains ablaze, so pursue them with tempest and terrify them with your storm. Cover their faces with shame so that men will seek your name, O Lord. May they ever be ashamed and dismayed. May they perish in disgrace. Let them know that you, whose name is the Lord, that you alone are the Most High over all the earth. Asaph has named the 10 nations that will form a confederacy. And when you look at the way they're surrounding Israel, you see that this confederacy is now being formed. It actually is in existence today, and we know who the people groups are. Well, while America is glued to the story of Ferguson, Israel is on the verge of a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. It's likely that the strike will either initiate this war or start a chain reaction of events that will quickly lead to this war. But what war? The war involving Iran is foretold in Ezekiel 38 and 39. It's not mentioned. Iran is not mentioned in Psalm 83. Gog, Magog is Iran and Russia. Something before the war in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And the Psalm 83 war involves nations not engaged in the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. So you have to take a look at this and say, well, if these nations are named and they are not involved in this coming battle of Armageddon, what happens to them? If they're an enemy of Israel, then something must happen to them that takes them out of play in this bigger war that brings the Mahdi and his legions of Muslims into battle against Israel. We must also look at the prerequisite for the war of Gog-Magog. When we read Ezekiel 38 and 39, and we'll read it a little later, Israel must be established as a sovereign nation. Israel is not a sovereign nation today. A sovereign nation has control over everything within its borders, and Israel does not. Israel is divided. And even though it's not a two-state solution, it still operates in a lot of ways as Palestinian and Jewish. Even the Temple Mount is under dispute as to who has the rights to it. So it's not a sovereign nation in that regard. It has to live securely without walls, meaning militarily secure. That means the wall that's there that divides the West Bank from Israel proper has to be gone. There can't be any walls there. Now, why is that wall there? That wall is there because prophetically you wouldn't know it was a city without walls unless you saw a wall and the wall was torn down. You wouldn't know that the Berlin Wall came down and East and West Berlin were merged if you didn't know that there was a wall there. So in God's way of giving us, showing us in the natural things going on in the supernatural, this is a prerequisite for this huge conflagration, this huge battle that's going to take place, Gog-Magog, with Iran teaming up with Russia and taking on Israel. The third is they have to be living at peace in the Middle East. How can peace be derived in the Middle East? How can it be accomplished? The only way it can possibly be accomplished is to conquer your enemies. It's the only possible way. You have to destroy your enemies. You can't live at peace with terrorists, can you? So you have to eliminate the terrorists. And the fourth is it's going to be one of, if not the richest nation on earth. Why? Because when we read the conditions of Ezekiel 38 and 39, the nations have brought their wealth to Israel. They've given it to Israel. Do you remember the first time that occurred was when they were leaving Egypt, and the Egyptians were giving them their gold and their silver. That's what became the golden calf. Today's earrings became, tomorrow's golden calf. And so we see that the nations are going to pour their wealth out on Israel. Now, how is it going to become the richest nation in the world? Well, we take a look at that geography that's coming into play in this impending battle, in this conspiracy, this confederacy of nations, and we begin to see that there's oil in these places. When we read Psalm 83, we need to understand who these nations are today so we can understand the difference between these two Middle Eastern wars. So here are the Psalm 83 Confederates. So it was named, you saw the tents of Eden. Those are the Palestinians and the South Jordanians. Those are the descendants of Esau. The Ishmaelites, those are the Saudis. Ishmael was the father of the Arabs. We talked about that when we talked about the Antichrist, that the lineage to Muhammad came through Ishmael, and from Muhammad to the 12th Imam, to the Mahdi, that will come and lead. He is what would be the man of lawlessness was Muhammad, and this group that he will lead into battle will be the Islamic nations, and we're going to take a look at those in a little bit. Moab, now remember the Moabitess, Ruth, part of the lineage of Jesus. Okay? But yet we know that they came out of the fallen nation of Lot, that Lot was drunk, his two daughters slept with him, and Moab was birthed out of that. Those are the Palestinians and the central Jordanians. So Jordan in its entirety is going to come into play. The Hagrites. Now, this is Bill Salas's chart, and I can tell you that he's calling the Hagarenes Egyptians, but I'm going to give you a corrected view of that because Egypt, 3,000 years ago, was a nation called Egypt. It was referred to as Egypt. So it wouldn't be implied that a people group who settled there, it would be referred to as Egypt. And Egypt is not mentioned in either the Psalm 83 Confederacy or Ezekiel 38 and 39. As a matter of fact, they're considered to be a friend of Israel. So I'm going to correct that for you, and we'll take that one out of play. Gebal is Hezbollah, the North Lebanese. You know that is the terrorist organization funded by Iran, filtering money through either the Muslim Brotherhood or ISIS. And although Iran fighters just did a bombing run in Syria alongside of American fighters, it's a very confusing message. This is that Shiite-Sunni battle that's taking place. These are the two warring factions within the Islamic world of two different brothers that, depending on who you talk to, whether one will give birth to the Mahdi or the other will give birth to the Mahdi. The Druze, D-R-U-Z-E, are a people group of Muslims that live in Israel, and they wear large baggy pants. And they believe that the Mahdi will be born to a man, and the reason they wear these baggy pants is so when the baby is born, it won't fall to the ground. It would be sacrilegious for it. So the pants are made so that they would catch the baby. And they absolutely believe that. And there's a traditional world. They have the long beards and the long mustaches, and they wrap them, and their hair is never cut. And they actually believe this. So the old guard is dying out, and the young people just wear Levi's and stuff like that. But some of the best shawarma and falafel places are in the Druze village. So we go there to visit them. And they serve in the IDF. So they're Muslims that serve alongside of Israeli. So they're Israeli citizens. So you can be a Muslim and be an Israeli citizen. You can be an Arab and Israeli citizen. So you have Hezbollah, which is the terrorist organization out of Lebanon and Turkey. Ammon, the Palestinians, and the North Jordanians. So now you have the Central Jordanians, the North Jordanians, and then we'll get, and we have the Central Jordanians. So Jordan is completely involved in this. Amalek. Now remember that the Arabs of the Sinai area and Amalek are the Amalekites. The Amalekites were supposed to be wiped out. Saul was sent to wipe out and kill every man, woman, child, slaughter their animals, and do all that, but he decided to spare Agag just to show him off because Saul was a prideful man. So in his error, what we call Saul's error, he spared the life of Agag, and we remember Haman was an Agagite. Haman was a direct descendant of Agag, of the Amalekites, the king of the Amalekites. So we know that that nation prospered in its own way and prospers and lives today because of Saul's error. So although Saul was considered to be the head and shoulders king, meaning that he was head and shoulders taller than everybody else and good looking, and when Samuel went out to look for a king, he was immediately drawn to the oldest son of Jesse, and because he looked similar to what Saul looked like. So when he was looking for a replacement, he figured he'd go with the tall, dark, and handsome guy. Instead, he went with the short, rugged, and young David. Philistia, that's Hamas of the Gaza Strip. Those are the people that are firing the missiles. Those are the ones that lob them in all the time in southern Israel. And Hamas is a terrorist organization, and you know that the word Hamas in Hebrew means violence. Did you all know that? Hamas means violence. Tyre is Hezbollah in the South Lebanese. And then Assyria are the Syrians and northern Iraqis. And what's interesting about the northern Iraqis is that's a country that borders, but a little bit distant border, but you're talking about the northeastern corner of Iraq is where the Assyrians are. Well, what group is controlled, what geography is controlled by ISIS right now? It's the northeast corner of Iraq. And so it's no coincidence that that is a group that has set themselves and set their sights on destroying Israel. So they're already in place. All of these groups are in place. Now, kind of give you a view of where they are. There's the heart of Jerusalem. Lebanon's there, Syria, Iraq, Jordan, the Palestinians within the borders, Saudi Arabia, Amalek, and Hamas, and I don't agree with that one. So you see it's all close in. But when you take a look at this geography and come all the way around this area, what do you look at? You're looking at the biblically mandated borders of Israel. If you were to superimpose a map and look at the supernatural, the God-inspired Genesis 15 borders of Israel, they would constitute from that point there, straight across to there, and up. So if you've ever seen a map of biblically mandated Israel, it's like a big parallelogram that comes straight down and across and up. Now, here's a corrected view without Egypt. And so this view takes you into Jordan. There's Israel within the borders. Okay? Egypt's down here, and Egypt was named in the Bible. So when you take a look at the colors, there's Edom right there. The Ishmaelites, big area of the Ishmaelites. Moab. The Hagrites are right there in the northern part of Jordan. And so we have that because we know who they are and where they settled. Ammon is the blue right there within the borders of Israel. That's the West Bank right there. Amalek is in the light green right there in the Gaza area. Philistia is the paler green right down there. Tyre in yellow. And then Assyria up here in the Mosul area. And so when we look at the Mosul area, what's that area? That's the area that's been the battlegrounds right now, the battle going on in Iraq. So when we look at this, we know that this 10-nation confederacy is destroyed. Every part of this landmass right here falls back into the hands of Israel. And so when we see that take place, and we know that Iraq is sitting on major oil reserves. So strategically, what does this do? Strategically, if you take a look and go straight north, it gives you access to Russia. And if you were to place a strategic airfield where the planes would not have to refuel, but they could make bombing runs, you would put it a distance from Israel itself, from Jerusalem or the Jezreel Valley. You would go, whatever that is, if it's 500, 700, 1,000 miles, whatever that is, that distance, would be strategically putting you right on the border and giving you access to be able to fight a battle. So if Psalm 83 is a precursor to Armageddon, something has to happen today Well, we know that the increase in violent crimes within the border of Israel, and most notable is that they mostly occur before sundown. Because that wall that I talked to you about that exists today, if you are not a resident of Israel and you're a resident of the Palestinian sector, you have to go through the wall and return to your home sometime close to sundown. So it might be 6, 6:30, 7 o'clock, but your enemies basically leave town. The stabbings in the marketplace, the shooting that took place today, were all done in daylight hours. So very little happens at night. They don't bomb buses at night. They don't. But the increase in violent activity. Now, the belief is that what's going to happen is that these terrorist acts are going to precipitate an election. Netanyahu has called for an election. And he's called for an election because there's discord within the parties within his coalition government. He took 3 parties and pulled them together into one to form a coalition government within Israel. And that's what you do in Israel. You form coalition governments. In the past, he was a coalition government with the religious parties. This time he was with Labor and one other party. And there's been some dissension because he's planning preemptively to go after the enemies and the money chain that's fueling Hamas and the Palestinian resistance. Not resistance, but the attacks, the terrorist acts that are taking place. So he's setting himself up to be reelected as prime minister and having the full faith and support of a coalition government that's going to back him in a preemptive attack against his enemies. So these represent the 10 nations of Psalm 83, the 10 people groups that are participants in it. The only way for Ezekiel 38 and 39 to be set up is for them to be at peace with their neighbors. Well, when you take a look at this, there's not peace in Israel. Now, it's not a dangerous place. Birmingham has more murders in it than Israel does. All of Israel, the whole nation of Israel, downtown Birmingham, has more murders here each year than they have in Israel. So it's still a very safe place to go, and the areas that we go to aren't areas that have ever really been attacked. We're talking about settlement communities and areas where we don't frequent. But something has to change. Now, during the last intifada, an intifada is a resistance fighting within the country where there was, remember the Arab Spring? That was an intifada. This is a battle that takes place within the borders, and the IDF is mobilized, and they pursue their enemy. Netanyahu is pretty much a hawk. He's a man that believes in battles and war, and he believes in fighting preemptively to squelch these things. But Israel has never been a nation that's launched an attack. They've been a nation, the IDF by its very nature, the Israel Defense Forces, are for the purpose of defending Israel. So they will respond to an attack. But things are changing. The climate is changing. And they see a money train from Jordan. They see a money train from Lebanon. They see a money train from Syria. They see money coming in from Iran. They see money coming in and supporting even Egypt, who now closed the tunnels, the border, finally stepped up and did something to say, we're not going to fund, we're not going to bring supplies and resupply Gaza. So Netanyahu's plan is to put together a coalition government where he's going to get 100% support to put together preemptive strikes. The same way that they preemptively struck Israel during the Six-Day War, during the Yom Kippur War, when everybody was down and Israel supernaturally won that war. He wants to preemptively strike these places where there are missile silos, where missiles are being launched, where Katyushas, where these various rockets are being fired, and take back. Well, this large area here is a very large oil reserve. So what's going to fund Israel? We know that there's oil in Israel, but it's untapped. There's huge reserves of natural gas, when natural gas is the first layer before you get to oil. So when you tap off the natural gas, then you drill down further, you get to the oil. So we know that great wealth is there and deposited there. But where there's great wealth, there's great armies. But the armies aren't organized, and that's part of the problem for the Middle East. This attack is a very disorganized attack. It's very terrorist organized. It's very much someone who's a suicide bomber, somebody that knows they're going to get shot. If they walk in a place and they're shooting, they're going to get shot. They have to be willing to give their life. But you can't really take on the nation this way. You can do what these kids are doing or these people are doing, walking into a building and shooting people, walking to a school and shooting people. You can make a statement, but you're not taking on the nation. So Israel is now forming a coalition government. Netanyahu has fired 2 of his coalition partners, and he's now out there working on a coalition government. I can tell you, just based on what I know about Israel, that the discussions are taking place even now in the re-election of Netanyahu, that if he's re-elected, his plan will be is to preemptively take out. He's tired of his citizens and civilians being killed, and it's time for him to do something. You and I would call it preemptively. They would call it a response. Okay? But it's going to be organized, and it's going to be massive. So this sets up those conditions that we talked about, and those 4 conditions. I want to go over them again with you, because we have to understand that it will be reestablished as a sovereign nation. So if it takes back those territories, if within the geography of Israel as exists today, there were no enemies within its borders, if it did not have any enemies adjacent to it, then it would be able to have sovereign rule and reign and adjudicate that entire area. In Jerusalem, in Jordan, in parts of Saudi Arabia, in parts of Iraq, they would be able to have sovereignty. They would live securely without walls. If you don't have to worry about the West Bank because you're there, because it's now all under Jewish rule, you don't need a wall. You don't need to keep your citizens and your civilians out, so you'd go ahead and destroy the wall as a symbolic gesture to say that the city is secure, the country is secure, we no longer need this physical defense. They have to be living at peace in the Middle East. The only way they can live at peace in the Middle East is to destroy their neighbors. It's the only way. Because what they have to do is they have to get to the missile silos, they have to get to the missile launching sites, and they have to take it over. They have to physically occupy it. So they move their troops into position so that they have sovereignty over that, and they're living at peace. And because of the wealth that they will acquire, they will be one of the wealthiest nations in the world, if not the wealthiest. So these are the prerequisites. These are the things that have to happen before Armageddon. Now, when we look at this story of Armageddon, Armageddon's referenced in the book of Revelation, this impending battle, and we know that there's a battle that takes place between what people refer to as the Antichrist. We'll call him the Mahdi. We'll call him leading the Islamic forces, because that is the dividing line that's coming. You can see it in the natural. You can see it, that Sharia law. You can see it in the Muslim settlements and the Muslim population of where they go. Here in Birmingham, they operate with the inner city. They operate within the prisons. Their model is to take prisoners and offer them services of rehabilitation, and you can connect with the brotherhood, and now all of a sudden you're a much larger group than you were with the gangs. See, so you take on that identity, and now you have this huge brotherhood. And they refer to it as a brotherhood, the Muslim brotherhood, and it's a brotherhood. You hear people, leaders like Louis Farrakhan, get up and talk about annihilating Israel. And we tolerate that in this country. And we hear about this rising group of anarchists that want to come and take over and implement their own form of law. Well, Sharia law is just another name for anarchy. Sharia law is just a whole new set of rules and regulations of an ideology. Islam is not a religion. It's an ideology. The Quran is not a Bible, it's an outline of ideology. And part of that ideology is that there's a concept in the Quran that allows somebody to lie to you. It gives them permission to lie to you. If you're not a believer, they can lie to you and say, we're a peaceful people. Now, does that mean that there are no peaceful Muslims? Of course not. You can't stereotype. It's like saying that all Jews are cheap, or that it's just not true. We have to understand that stereotyping and profiling is not beneficial for any people group. But I've said before, I'm not anti-Muslim, I'm not anti-Islam, I'm not anti-Arab, I'm not anti-anybody, I'm pro-Jesus. So in that vein, I'm about sharing the gospel with everybody. Doesn't matter what their background is. But we have to be more committed to the body of Messiah than they're committed to their sin in order for us to advance the kingdom. So when we look at these conditions that have to be met for this end-time war, this great event that's called Armageddon, where the battlefield is so large, so wide, so deep, that it can fit millions of people. We don't have a lot of areas like that in America. I guess we have it in Nebraska and the cornfields, in the plains in the Midwest, where there's large expanses. Well, in Israel, the Jezreel Valley, the mountains of Megiddo, Har Megiddo, where Armageddon comes from, are large and awesome, and they're so far-reaching that you can't take it in visually. You can't stand back far enough to get the full view. You have to turn your head to see the far left-hand side, and you have to turn your head to see, and it's a panoramic. And it's so overwhelming, and it's so vast, and its connection to these nations that you can see where these armies can come in, how they can get into Israel. But when we read Ezekiel 38, 39, it sets this up, and we have to see who the players are and who the alliances are, because the alliance here is Iran, which is Persia. And remember, the Persia of the Bible is where the edict was issued during the time of Esther that Israel would be given the God-given right, the king ordered it, that they would have the right to defend themselves against any attacker and to defend the Jewish people. This was an edict by the king. This overwrote the edict that was given at the time of Haman that said we're to destroy the Jewish people. So this overrode that, and it was from, I forget how many provinces, 27 provinces, I believe. Is that correct? How many provinces were mentioned, but it was far outside the reach of Persia. It went all the way to Cush. It went pretty far. So this mandate, this edict exists today. It was never rescinded. It was sealed by the king of Persia. And so now you have Iran, and I've shared with you before that the name Iran was influenced by Adolf Hitler, because in Arabic, Iran means Aryan. And so he was a key component of having them do racial cleansing and the sanitizing of the people of Iran, so that under the Ayatollah and under all the Ayatollah's rules, that they would have a nation that would be the Islamic State of Iran. So you remember the fall of the Shah of Iran, the Jewish emigration from, Jews were run out of Iran at the time, and they became an Islamic nation. So when we read Ezekiel 38 and 39, and we'll probably finish right about at the end of this, it's a long couple of chapters, but I want you to listen carefully to the very words of this, because this is a prophecy. And this is the prophecy that sets up the Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon isn't foretold for the first time in the book of Revelation. It's mentioned in Zechariah. It's mentioned in Joel. It's mentioned in the Chronicles. It's mentioned in the Psalms. And it's mentioned here by Ezekiel. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. Prophesy against him. Now you know it's a person. So you have people in place. We believe that's Vladimir Putin. We believe for a long time that it was Muhammad Ahmadinejad. And it may very well be again, because Putin was out of the picture for a while, but he resurfaced. Ahmadinejad's out of the picture right now, but he may resurface. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, all of them brandishing their swords. Persia, Iran, Cush, and Put will be with them, all with shields and helmets, also Gomer and all its troops, and Beth Togarmah, from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gathered about you, and take command of them. After many days you will be called to arms. In future years you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which has long been desolate. So this is the return of the Jewish people to the state of Israel. This is returning to a country that recovered from war. What war? The Psalm 83 war. So there's a period of time from the Psalm 83 war when that confederacy is eliminated. A period of time has to exist for the recovery of the troops, for the recovery of the nation, for the recovery and the rebuilding of cities. There's going to be cities blown up. And so this is referring to that. They had been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. So this is the city without walls. This is the country without walls. This is living in safety. Now, it talks about all the Jewish people returning. So we know that millions have returned, and the 4 million from the former Soviet Union, but I'm still here. My mother's still here. My sisters are still here. So something's going to happen for the Jewish people to not be safe here or not be safe in their countries and need to go to Israel. Because he's talking about the nation of Israel, the people of Israel. He's not talking about the church, he's talking about the Jewish people. They had been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. You and all your troops and the many nations with you will go up, advancing like a storm. You'll be like a cloud covering the land. So when we look at this picture that I have for you of the Jezreel Valley, when you think about a cloud that's that large, you're talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, millions of troops. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. So now they're talking about Israel. There cannot be walls in Israel because it has to be unwalled and without gates and bars. So you can't have this massive wall bordering the West Bank that's cutting it off, and even talking about extending it and taking one and putting it across Gaza. It's got to be living without walls and without gates and bars. And so we have to examine these prophecies, and we have to look at certain conditions being met. And so far we've seen two of those conditions. He says, I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled. How many times do you hear that word today, resettlement? Resettlement, resettlement. It's in our vocabulary. Well, now imagine now that you're talking about ancient Israel. You're talking about hundreds of years before Jesus walks this earth. And you're talking now about the diaspora moving back, the dispersed Jewish people moving back, not just the remnant that God has reserved, but these people groups coming back and resettling the ruins. Well, you have ruins all over Israel. You have cities like Dan, the city of Dan, which is at the headwaters of the Jordan River. And you have it, and it's an ancient ruins, but there's plenty of land there. There's lots of area to resettle. And we're not talking about resettlement like in what we call occupied territories, because they're not really occupied. But we're talking about resettling the ruins, the ancient places, the ancient cities of Israel. So you hear that word resettlement, and you see it right here in the Scriptures, resettled. It's a common everyday phrase in the news. It's contemporary. These prophecies are contemporary. They're not ancient. They're not for then, they're for now. They're for these conditions to be met. And the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living at the center of the land. We talked about rich in livestock and goods. They have to have noted wealth, like Solomon's wealth. It was noted around the world. The world at large knew about Solomon's wealth and how vast his storehouses were. And so it's got to be restored to that. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all his visitors will say to you, have you come to plunder? Have you gathered your hoards to loot, to carry off silver and gold and take away livestock and goods and siege much plunder? There must be enough there that's going to draw the attention, the Fort Knox kind of attention. Vast repositories of silver and gold, wealth that's gathered from the nations. Therefore, Son of Man, prophesy and say to Gog, this is what the Sovereign Lord says. In that day when my people Israel are living in safety, See, not concerned for their enemies that are surrounding them. No longer are they concerned about the missiles being launched in from Gaza. No longer are they concerned about an attack in the Negev. No longer are they concerned about what's going on the West Bank. No longer are they concerned with what's going on in Hezbollah out of Lebanon or Hamas that's in the borders of Israel, because they're living at safety. Living in safety. Will you not take notice of it? You will come from your place in the far north, Russia. Go as far north as you can go, you're in Russia. You and many nations with you, all of them riding on horses, a great horde, a mighty army. You will advance against my people Israel like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, O Gog, I will bring you against my land, so that the nations may know me when I show myself holy through you before their eyes. This is a nation of believers, a nation of people who believe in God, not in Jesus, but in God. And if you go to Israel, you'll see that it is a God-loving nation of people, that everybody there loves the Lord, loves God, but they don't know Jesus. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Are you not the one I spoke of in former days by my servants, the prophets of Israel? Meaning that this is not the first time that God is speaking of this. He's confirmed it over and over in His Word. And we have to look at the words of Joel. We have to look at the words of Jeremiah. We have to look at the words of Daniel. We have to look at these things that are forming and taking shape, because every bit of the prophecy of the Bible leads up to a major event that's going to take place to bring Jesus back. You mean that's foretold in the Old Testament? Of course it is. Zechariah 14 is the prophecy of the second coming of Jesus. It's where we clearly understand that He came as Jesus, son of Joseph, to take our suffering, and He'll return as Jesus, son of David, and He'll fulfill the prophecy of the rabbis saying that He'll come back and restore peace in Jerusalem. He'll come back and reclaim Jerusalem, and Israel will be under Jerusalem will be under Jewish rule. Jesus comes to perform that in the line of David. It says this is what will happen. At that time, they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them. This is what will happen that day. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I declare that at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. Well, isn't that interesting? Because that was the prophecy over Ishmael. That was the prophecy that God said He would be a wild donkey among men. He would war against all the nations of the world, and he would war against his brothers. So now you have this army of Muslims turning on each other. Does that sound reasonable? Yeah, because they can come together under the Mahdi and set aside their Sunni and their Shiite differences. But when it comes time for somebody to die, when you're going to be held to task of which side of this you're on, was the Mahdi, did he come through this guy or through this guy? All of a sudden they're fighting with each other again. Isn't that the way things happen? How many of you were at a Thanksgiving dinner where this broke out? Happens in families. Happens in families. He says, I will execute judgment upon him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on him. Does this sound like plagues to you? Does this sound like the wrath, the bold judgments and the wrath that God pours out? Well, it should. God bless you. It should. Aren't we revisiting things of the book of Exodus, of what God already laid upon the shoulders of Pharaoh in Egypt? Yes. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. Son of man, prophesy against Gog and say, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. I will turn you around and drag you along. I will bring you from the far north and send you against the mountains of Israel. Then I will strike your bow from your left hand and make your arrows drop from your right hand. Now start to picture this picture. This vast army has set itself up. This vast battlefield. They're turning against Israel. And all of a sudden their weapons start to fall to the ground. picture of a nuclear weapon coming to Israel and stopping in the sky and falling back to where it came from. This is where this comes from. It's where this view that their arrows will fall to the ground. Your arrows drop from your right hand on the mountains of Israel. You will fall, you and all your troops and the nations with you. I will give you as food to all kinds of carrion birds and to the wild animals. You will fall in the open field, for I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. I will send fire on Magog and on those who live in the safety in the coastlands, and they will know that I am the Lord. I will make known my holy name among my people Israel. I will no longer let my holy name be profaned, and the nations will know that I, the Lord, am the Holy One of Israel. It is coming, it will surely take place, declares the sovereign Lord. This is the day I have spoken of. Then those who live in the towns of Israel will go up and use the weapons for fuel and burn them up. The small and large shields, the bows and arrows, the war clubs and spears. For 7 years they will use them for fuel. They will not need to gather wood from the fields or cut it from the forest, because they will use the weapons for fuel. And they will plunder those who plundered them and loot those who looted them, declares the sovereign Lord. On that day I will give Gog a burial place in Israel, in the valley of those who travel east toward the sea. It will block the way of travelers, because Gog and all his hordes will be buried there. So it will be called the valley of Hamon-Gog, the valley of Armageddon, the valley of Megiddo. For 7 months the house of Israel will be burying them in order to cleanse the land. All the people of the land will bury them, and the day I am glorified will be a memorable day for them, declares the sovereign Lord. Men will be regularly employed to cleanse the land. Some will go throughout the land, and in addition to them, others will bury those that remain on the ground. At the end of 7 months, they will begin their search. As they go through the land, and one of them sees a human bone, he will set up a marker beside it until the grave diggers have buried it in the valley of Hamon-Gog. Also, a town called Hamanah will be there, and so they will cleanse the land. Starting to see a picture of desolation, of a defeated army, of God setting up his kingdom. This is the beginning of God setting up his kingdom in Israel. Not in the church, not in Rome, not in Cleveland, Tennessee. Isn't that where the Assemblies of God or the Church of God is headquartered up there? Not in any of those places, in Israel. Son of man, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Call out to every kind of bird and all the wild animals. Now remember, you have dominion. Through God, through faith in Jesus, you have dominion. Now, who commanded the animals? Adam had command over the animals. Okay? God called the animals to come to Noah. Remember, Noah didn't go out and gather animals. God called them. He has dominion over all the earth and all that's in it. Assemble and come together from all around. What? I was on a roll there. I had my cadence. I don't like messing up my cadence. But I'm back. There we go. Son of man, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Call out to every kind of bird and the wild animals. Assemble and come together from all around to sacrifice. To the sacrifice I am preparing for you, the great sacrifice on the mountain of Israel. There you eat flesh and drink blood. Well, wait a second. What about that prohibition of blood? Well, who created the prohibition of blood? God. So if this is what he says to do, this is what we do. You will eat the flesh of mighty men and drink the blood of princes of the earth, as if they were rams and lambs and goats and bulls, all of them fattened animals from Bashan. At the sacrifice I am preparing for you, you will eat fat till you are glutted and drink blood till you are drunk. At my table you will eat your fill of horses and riders, mighty men and soldiers of every kind, declares the sovereign Lord. Pretty wild. I will display my glory among the nations, and all the nations will see the punishment I inflict and the hand I lay upon them. From that day forward, the house of Israel will know that I am the Lord their God. And the nations will know that the people of Israel went into exile for their sin, because they were unfaithful to me. So I hid my face from them and handed them over to their enemies, and they all fell by the sword. I dealt with them according to their uncleanness and their offenses, and I hid my face from them. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I will now bring Jacob back from captivity, and will have compassion on all the people of Israel, and I will be zealous for my holy name. They will forget their shame and all the unfaithfulness they showed toward me when they lived in safety in their land with no one to make them afraid. When I have brought them back from the nations and have gathered them from the countries of their enemies, I will show myself holy through them in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord their God, for though I sent them into exile among the nations, I will gather them to their own land, not leaving any behind. I will no longer hide my face from them, for I will pour out my Spirit on the house of Israel, declares the Lord. So we just hit 8 o'clock, perfect timing. When we get back together next week, we're going to talk about the Gog-Magog coalition, who these players are. We'll take a look at the map of the fullness of this Islamic, all that dark green. You take a look at Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. You take a look at all the influence, plus the Malaysian and Indonesian influence, and the wealth that comes out of Malaysia to fuel this Islamic revolution that's going to take place, that they lead them into battle. People from all these nations that surround Israel will be led into battle, and you start to see a picture now of where they will gather their armies from. And so when you see this visibly, when you go from the north of Israel, where do you go? Straight up to the northernmost point, you go to Russia. Okay? Vladimir Putin. And you take a look at this expanse of Russia. Now you see that this Muslim migration is now filtering in, filtering further and further and further, and it continues to creep, and pretty soon you'll see it all across this area. So we are finished for tonight. I want to encourage you that there are offering envelopes throughout, offering plates, if you would kindly support us. Jim, this is your time. This is the day. Your time has come. Let's go ahead and close in a word of prayer. I've got books available if you want them signed for gifts. Also, the 4 DVD set is up there. Makes a great gift item.